Welcome back to Short English Story. Today we will share the story of Olivia from Spain. When I look back at my journey of learning English, I realize that the most important breakthrough came when I stopped memorizing endless grammar rules and vocabulary lists. For a long time I believed that the only way to learn a language was to sit down with a notebook, write down dozens of new words, try to repeat them, and then attempt to recall them later. I did this for months and sometimes years, and yet when I faced a real conversation I could barely put words together. I could not understand native speakers and I felt frustrated. The turning point arrived when I discovered that learning English through context and daily habits was far more effective than forcing myself to remember isolated rules or lists. It was then that my story of real progress began. At first I had doubts. Could it really be possible to improve without drilling grammar or memorizing? But I decided to try. I started with reading. Instead of textbooks filled with complicated explanations, I chose simple stories and short articles. Reading allowed me to see words inside real sentences. I noticed how verbs changed with time, how adjectives described feelings, how expressions appeared again and again. At the beginning I understood maybe only 90% of the text, sometimes even less. But I kept reading every day. The magic was that my brain slowly filled in the gaps without me even trying. Words that seemed strange on Monday felt familiar by Friday. Expressions that confused me the first time made sense the 10th time I saw them. Reading gave me not just vocabulary but also confidence because I realized I could understand ideas without perfect knowledge of every single word. After reading became a daily habit, I added listening. At first, listening was painful. Native speakers spoke too fast. Their words blended together and I felt lost. But I did not give up. I chose simple podcasts for learners and short news reports read at a slower pace. I listened once, then again. Each time I caught a little more. I learned to enjoy repetition because it revealed details I had missed before. Slowly my ears became used to the rhythm of English. I discovered that listening was not just about words but about intonation, pauses, and emotion. I even began to predict what might come next in a sentence because I had heard similar structures in my reading. Listening every day, even for 10 minutes, became like exercise for my ears. Along with reading and listening, I began writing a diary in English. At first my entries were short. I wrote about my breakfast or my plans for the day. My grammar was not perfect and my vocabulary was limited, but I kept writing. The diary gave me a safe space to experiment. Over time my entries grew longer. I described my feelings, my thoughts, and my experiences. Writing every day forced me to recall words I had seen while reading or heard while listening. Sometimes I invented new sentences based on patterns I had absorbed unconsciously. I did not worry about mistakes. I knew that the act of writing was training my brain to think in English. The diary became a mirror of my progress. One technique that changed everything for me was shadowing. I had never heard of it before, but once I tried it I understood its power. Shadowing means listening to a speaker and immediately repeating what they say, as if you are their shadow. I chose short recordings from podcasts and videos. At first it felt strange to repeat so quickly, almost like an echo. But this practice trained my mouth to move in new ways. English sounds that once felt impossible slowly became natural. My tongue learned to create the TH sound. My lips practiced the W sound. And my voice copied the melody of real speakers. Shadowing for just a few minutes a day gave me more progress than months of traditional pronunciation exercises. It was like singing along with a song until the rhythm became part of me. The greatest transformation happened when I started thinking in English. For years I translated everything in my head. I would hear a question, translate it into my language, think of an answer, translate back into English, and only then speak. This process was slow and stressful. My teacher once told me to stop translating and instead to live in English. First I thought it was impossible. How could I think in a language I did not fully know? But I started small. I described objects around me in English. I looked at a chair and said chair. I saw the sky and whispered blue sky. I planned my day in simple English sentences before I left home. Step by step, my brain began to accept English as a natural tool. One evening I realized I had just spoken to myself in English without thinking. Later I even dreamed in English. That was the moment I knew I was truly changing from a learner to a speaker. All of these practices, reading, listening, writing, shadowing, and thinking, became part of my daily routine. The key was not intensity but consistency. In the past I tried to study for hours once a week, but I always forgot what I had learned. Now I realized that 10 minutes every day was far more powerful. Reading a page before bed, listening to a short podcast during breakfast, writing 3 sentences in my diary, shadowing 1 dialogue, and thinking in English while walking to work. These small steps built a solid foundation. They became habits, and habits shape who we are. The beauty of learning through context is that grammar comes naturally. I never sat down to memorize the past tense endings. Yet through stories and conversations I absorbed them. I saw how questions were formed, how negatives worked, and how tenses changed. Without heavy study, I found myself using correct structures because they sounded right after so much exposure. The same happened with vocabulary. Instead of memorizing lists, I acquired words in situations. When I read a story about travel, I learned words like ticket, luggage, and journey. When I listened to a podcast about food, I learned taste, recipe, and flavor. These words stayed with me because they were connected to experiences. Using English in real life confirmed everything. I started talking to tourists in my city. At first I was nervous and spoke very simply. But even short conversations gave me energy. I joined online groups and wrote messages to friends abroad. Every time I used English, I felt it becoming part of me. I stopped seeing it as a subject to study and started seeing it as a living language. It was not about passing exams anymore. It was about connecting with people, sharing stories, and understanding the world. Looking back, I see how different I am from the learner I once was. Before, I was trapped by rules and lists. Now I am free to communicate, to read books, to watch movies, and to express myself. The change did not come overnight. It came from daily habits, from living the language instead of studying it in isolation. If there is one lesson my story teaches, it is this. Do not try to memorize English. Live it. Read every day. Listen often. Write a little. Shadow voices. Think in the language. Let grammar and vocabulary grow naturally in context. Make it part of your daily life and watch yourself transform. This journey is still continuing. I am not perfect and I do not want to be. My goal is to be clear, to be understood, and to connect. English has given me friends, opportunities, and confidence. It is no longer something separate from me. It is a part of who I am. And it all began when I chose to learn through context and daily habits instead of chasing endless lists and rules. When I first started learning English, I imagined it would mostly be about memorizing vocabulary lists, studying grammar rules, and repeating exercises from a book. That was how my school teachers presented it. They gave us long lists of words and expected us to copy them down and recite them later. They explained grammar as if it were a complicated system of formulas, and they told us that only after years of practice would we finally be ready to speak with confidence. At that time, I believed them. I thought English was a subject that belonged in classrooms, on worksheets, and in exams. But as time passed, I realized something important. English is not only a school subject. It is a living language that people use every single day to connect with each other. If I wanted to really learn it, I had to go beyond the classroom and make it part of my own life. I had to use English in real situations with real people in ways that mattered to me. This discovery changed everything. At first, it was not easy. I was shy and afraid of making mistakes. When I saw tourists in my city, I wanted to talk to them, but I hesitated. What if I said something wrong? What if they laughed at me or did not understand? My heart raced whenever I thought about it. But then one day, I reminded myself of why I wanted to learn English in the first place. I wanted to connect with people from around the world. I wanted to hear their stories, share my own, and feel that language was a bridge between us. If I never tried, I would never notice. So I gathered my courage and started small. The first time I spoke to a tourist, I simply said hello. My voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but they smiled and answered. That gave me a spark of courage. The next time I asked where they were from. Another time I gave directions to a couple looking for a museum. These conversations lasted only a few seconds, but to me they felt like victories. I was no longer just studying English, I was living it. Encouraged by these little successes, I looked for more opportunities to practice. I joined an online group where people from different countries came together to chat in English. First, I only listened. I watched how they greeted each other, asked questions, and kept conversations going. Slowly, I began to type simple sentences. Sometimes my grammar was not perfect, but the other members were patient and kind. They encouraged me and told me not to worry about mistakes. Over time, I gained confidence and started participating more actively. I made friends from places I had never visited before: India, Brazil, Canada, and many more. These connections showed me how English could bring strangers together and make them feel like part of one big community. Practicing English online gave me a new kind of freedom. I could talk about my hobbies, my city, my daily routines, or even ask questions about other cultures. Every conversation became a chance to practice not only words and grammar, but also real communication. I learned how to express my feelings, tell stories, and share opinions. The best part was that I was not studying in the traditional sense. I was simply living my life and using English as a tool to connect. Still, I wanted more practice in real face-to-face situations. That is when I decided to join local events where tourists often gathered. Sometimes it was a city tour, sometimes a small cultural festival. I volunteered to help as a guide or assistant. At first, my role was simple, like handing out maps or welcoming people. But even in these small moments, I had the chance to speak English. I learned how to say polite greetings, explain simple directions, and answer basic questions. I remember one special day very clearly. A group of tourists from England asked me about local restaurants. I explained in English where they could try traditional food. They listened carefully, smiled, and thanked me warmly. One of them even told me, "You speak good English." That sentence stayed in my heart for a long time. It was a reminder that effort matters more than perfection. As my confidence grew, I started to push myself further. Instead of just giving short answers, I tried to keep conversations going. If a tourist asked me about my city, I shared a short story about its history or culture. If they asked about my favorite food, I explained why I loved it and even recommended where to try it. The more I spoke, the more natural it felt. My words were not always perfect, but they carried meaning, and that was what really mattered. At the same time, I continued practicing online. I joined language exchange groups where people wanted to learn each other's languages. I taught some of them basic phrases in my native language, and in return they helped me with English. These exchanges were not only about language but also about friendship. I learned about their families, their work, their dreams, and their cultures. Sometimes we laughed at funny mistakes, other times we discussed serious topics. Each conversation was like opening a new window to the world. One important lesson I learned is that English should not be kept inside notebooks. It should live in daily habits. So I started adding English into small parts of my routine. For example, when I walked to the bus stop, I tried to describe the things I saw in English. When I bought something at a store, I imagined how I would explain the purchase to a foreign friend. At night, I wrote short diary entries in English about my day. None of these activities took much time, but they kept English alive in my mind. Slowly, thinking in English became more natural. Instead of translating every word from my native language, I began to form sentences directly in English. This was a big step. It made conversations smoother and helped me react more quickly when speaking. Sometimes I even dreamed in English, and although the dreams were strange, they were proof that my brain was adapting. Over months and years, my relationship with English changed completely. It was no longer a distant subject from school. It became part of my daily life, something I carried with me everywhere. When I met tourists, I spoke with them. When I went online, I joined English conversations. When I was alone, I thought in English or practiced speaking to myself. Each moment became a chance to grow. Of course, there were still challenges. Sometimes I forgot words, sometimes I misunderstood others, and sometimes I felt embarrassed. But I learned not to give up. Mistakes were not signs of failure. They were steps on the path of progress. Every time I made a mistake, I remembered it better the next time. Slowly, my vocabulary grew, my grammar improved, and my confidence became stronger. Looking back, I realized that using English in real life gave me more than just language skills. It gave me courage, friendships, and new perspectives. It taught me to listen carefully, to be patient, and to connect with people who were different from me. It showed me that language is not about perfect sentences but about sharing meaning and building bridges. Now, when people ask me how I learned English, I tell them my secret is not a secret at all. I simply made English part of my everyday life. I talked with friends. I spoke to tourists. I joined online groups. I used English in real conversations, no matter how small. And little by little, these small steps built a foundation of confidence and fluency. If you are learning English too, I encourage you to do the same. Do not wait until you feel perfect. Start now with simple words and simple sentences. Say hello to someone. Ask a question. Join an online chat. Write a diary entry. Use English in your real life in ways that matter to you. The more you use it, the more natural it will become. And one day, without even realizing it, you will look back and see how far you have come, just like I did. English is not just something to study. It is something to live.